Celebrating 43 years on the air, Farm Week is a production of Mississippi State University Extension.
Today on Farm Week,
I think this issue is not going to disappear.
Trade and more trade. The U.S. working to push forward on all fronts. Plus, as demand for American pork heats up, so does the battle to produce the supply safely. In southern gardening, it's wintertime and maybe time to put your plants to bed. And finally, taking partnership to a whole new level. Farm Week starts right now. Hello everybody, I'm Mike Russell. Thanks for joining us today on Farm Week. Trade and more trade, getting trade relationships back on track and putting money in the pockets of American producers. That seems to be job one of President Donald Trump. With that in mind, he flew overseas for the World Economic Forum. At the same time, the USMCA was close to being signed. Here's Paul Yeager with our trade update.
Global economic leaders and government types assembled this week in Davos, Switzerland for the World Economic Forum. Business was on the official agenda for most, but the topics for sideline meetings included troop positions and climate change. President Trump opened up another trade front with the European Union, threatening to add tariffs on European imports as France looks to tax U.S. tech giants like Google and Amazon.
They have trade barriers where you can't trade. They have tariffs all over the place. They make it impossible. They are frankly more difficult to do business with than China.
The president continued in his press conference to air grievances about the WTO.
The World Trade Organization has been very unfair to the United States for many, many years. And without it, China wouldn't be China. China wouldn't be where they are right now. I mean, China, that was the vehicle that they used. And I give them great credit. And I also don't give the people that were in my position great credit because, frankly, they let that all happen.
One of the most contentious issues for the U.S. is the labeling of China and India as developing countries, allowing them to use a different set of rules in the WTO. The topic is a frequent discussion point in meetings like this one in Switzerland.
A lot of debate from one side, from the other. Concerns are expressed. And I think this issue is not going to disappear. We have to face it. And how we're going to square the circle is something that we have to figure out.
Phase 1 between the U.S. and China may be signed, but that didn't mean the global economy has stabilized. Officials with the International Monetary Fund said last October the global economy is slowing down, but they described the situation differently.
While there are signs of stabilization, the global outlook remains sluggish and there are no clear signals of a turning point. There is simply no room for complacency, and the world needs stronger multilateral cooperation and national-level policies to support a sustained recovery that benefits all.
One factor in the North American economy is the USMCA agreement, which left the U.S. Senate this week bound for the White House. Canada's Prime Minister emphasized his hope for the House of Commons approval for the new NAFTA.
Passing the new NAFTA in Parliament is our priority. Millions of Canadians depend on stable, reliable trade with our largest trading partners, from farmers in Alberta and auto workers in Windsor to aluminum producers in Saguenay and entrepreneurs in St. John's or in Vancouver.
Mexico ratified the agreement reached in 2018, but not the version the U.S. signed off on last week. Attendees to Iowa's Pork Congress this week in Des Moines were briefed on trade issues in China, USMCA, and the number one market by value, Japan.
And they've been a great customer of ours, but once the U.S. pulled out of the TPP, we started to fall behind in some of our export competitors. And so securing that trade deal with Japan that kicked in on January 1st will bring us back to that level playing field. So that was a big win for us going forward too, because we were concerned that we would start to lose market share there, and now we'll be able to continue to have access to that market.
With trade agreements with Japan, Canada, Mexico, and a Phase 1 deal with China in his pocket, the president moves on to another trade frontier, the European Union. 28 countries that represent a trade destination for American producers. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says she hopes for a deal with Trump within a few weeks. Exactly what that deal looks like, at least publicly, is unclear, but von der Leyen is optimistic. Pork processing line speeds back in the news. You might remember that late last year, the USDA pushed through a final rule that essentially eliminated speed limits on processing in hog slaughterhouses. Now, a food workers union has brought suit in federal court saying that increased speeds are unsafe. That suit was heard a few days ago in district court in Minnesota. At the same time, mainstream media is also reporting that the inspection changes made possible by the new rules could cause greater risk of tainted meat. The USDA filed a motion to dismiss the suit. No word yet on what, if any, decision has been made by the court. Coffee giant Starbucks says that in the interest of reducing its carbon footprint, it will cut back on using dairy products. CEO Kevin Johnson said recently that in the interest of sustainability, the company would explore, quote, plant-based options. He said alternative milks will be a big part of that solution. Starbucks says it uses more than 90 million gallons of milk a year and that dairy made up 21% of its carbon footprint in 2018. And speaking of dairy, food labeling back in the news as well. A bipartisan group of senators recently wrote to FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn, urging him to crack down on the use of dairy terms in relation to non-dairy products. It's a similar battle to the one being fought in the meat industry. In the letter, the senators wrote, quote, there are many non-dairy imitation products in the marketplace using dairy terms. This represents a clear violation of existing FDA rules. When non-dairy alternatives use dairy terms to describe their imitation products, the imitators are often assumed to have the same health benefits and nutrient levels as real dairy products. Dairy farmers are now waiting for action from FDA. We encourage you to move swiftly to address this unfairness. And no doubt you heard that nearly 4 years after making a campaign promise, the Trump administration is proposing removal of the controversial Waters of the U.S. rule. While EPA Administrator Wheeler says states are free to step in with their own protections, environmental groups and some state governments are promising legal action. The Waters rollback was well received by most farmers, ranchers, and lobbying groups, including Mississippi's Ag Commissioner Andy Gibson. In a statement, he wrote, quote, I commend the Trump administration, the EPA, and the Army for streamlining the definition of the waters of the United States. This rollback of the burdensome 2015 rule will positively impact our farmers, ranchers, and landowners across the state, giving them regulatory certainty while clearly defining jurisdiction between federal and state regulations. Our farmers are some of the greatest conservationists that champion the management of our natural resources. On the lighter side, this time of year, time to tell your plans to go to bed. Here's Dr. Gary Bachman with an explanation.
The winter months are a great time to get the garden ready for the summer growing season. A project every gardener will benefit from is building a raised bed. Today's Southern Gardening is at the Coastal Research and Extension Center in the demonstration People's Garden. A raised bed is exactly as the name suggests, a landscape or garden bed that is higher than the surrounding grade. A raised bed should be no wider than 4 feet, so the longest reach is only 2 feet. This allows easy access to the bed from either side. The size can be whatever suits the site or the gardener's need, like these 2-foot square rosemary beds or these longer display beds. Hardscape materials like lumber, galvanized metal, stones, and bricks are used to build sides that will keep the growing mix where it belongs and keeps your garden looking tidy. The choice of materials is the gardener's decision. We've used the newer treated lumber, which has become very garden friendly. Once the sides are built, Fill the garden with a mix designed for raised beds. Don't use regular ground soil. A raised bed is really just a very large container, so we need to use a mix that drains well and remains light and fluffy. This makes your raised bed easy to work in, and the plants really respond well to these mixes. For more information, see the Mississippi State University Extension publication, Constructing Raised Beds for the Mississippi Gardener. I'm horticulturist Gary Bachman, and I'll see you next time on Southern Gardening.
We'll take a break right here, but don't go away. Coming up in our Farm Week feature, for decades they've been saying get big or get out when it comes to agriculture. Most people still say that. But the owners of 8 farms in Iowa said, wait a minute, there's got to be a better way. And they set out to prove you can be small and still be big. It's all about growing the talent pool. And how do you do that? Well, let's just say it takes a creative approach to moving up and down the rows. That's coming up on Farm Week. Don't go away.
Cancer is cancer, and just to watch a family member go through cancer, go through the suffering is as hard as it gets. When my mom was sick, we'd text every day. I'd ask her things like, how are you doing, how are you feeling? And I'll never forget one day she said, I wish I didn't hurt today. Cancer took my mom in 2013. They didn't take her soul, they didn't take her spiritually, and she's always gonna be with me. Get screened, it's the right thing to do. Stop it before it happens, catch it early. Do it for yourself and do it for your loved ones around you.
It's a simple idea. Knowledge that transforms lives shouldn't be limited to those on a campus, but extended to any and all who want or need it, wherever they are. At Mississippi State University, we've been making that possible for more than 100 years through the MSU Extension Service. What began as an effort to extend the latest research to farmers has become something much more. Today, we're helping Mississippians from all walks of life, giving them the tools they need to build a brighter future. We're sparking the imagination of students around the state and inspiring the next generation of doctors. We're helping rural communities find their way to the internet and connect to the world at large. And we're teaching families how to lead healthier lives in ways both big and small. MSU is standing firm in its commitment to that one simple idea: extend the knowledge that transforms lives wherever they are.
Time for a deeper look into the markets. As you may remember from last week, Zach Ashmore has taken over that section of the show. Zach?
Thanks, Mike. This week's Deeper Look continues our story on African swine fever, also called ASF, and how it caused China to import chicken from the U.S. That isn't the only meat they're taking in. There's more to the story. As ASF continues to ravage China's pig herds, the international markets see an opportunity by selling pork and other meat products to the Chinese. As reported by Reuters, last year China imported 1.33 million tons of pork from January to September, an increase of 43% from the previous year. Beef imports over the same period were 1.13 million tons, an increase of 53%.
ASF in China has been a big reason that we're seeing some of the activity we are with this Phase 1 deal. ASF has decimated the hog population in China. Pork is the biggest consumed meat by Chinese consumers. So there's a big hole there that needs to be filled either with more pork, and we are sending more pork to China, but also if you think about beef and poultry, Chinese consumers are opening up to that as well. They just need more animal protein in their diet. So I think that's been a big driver in a lot of what we're seeing in this Phase 1 deal.
Experts predict that the price of pork in China will top out in 2022 and then normalize over the next few years as Chinese swine herds repopulate, though imports will be high up through 2025. The U.S. won't be the only country exporting meat to China. Europe is selling too, but is also at risk. As reported by Politico, Germany's agricultural minister has warned of ASF entering through their Polish border. The EU's largest pork producer is looking to cull massive amounts of swine should that happen. ASF isn't the only issue hitting China these days. Coronavirus has been a big topic in the news, causing the quarantine of entire cities to prevent spreading the deadly virus. What impacts will this have on the markets? Ag economist Arlen Suderman gives his thoughts.
The markets are dominated by the funds, and price is still a function of supply and demand, but it's modified by the flow of money, so it changes how the markets operate. And with coronavirus, it brings back a lot of fears of the SARS virus in 2002 and 2003, where people quit traveling, commerce slowed down as a result, and therefore it was a drag on the global economy. And so the funds, they don't know a lot of specifics about the commodity. Some do, but a lot of them don't. And so they'll say, oh, slower global economy, less demand for commodities. So when coronavirus hits the headlines, sell commodities.
The Phase 1 trade agreement and USMCA, as you just saw, have been big news in the markets recently. How have they affected the cattle markets, and what are the limitations? Farmweek Ag economist Josh Maples fills us in.
So with all of the trade deals we have going forward, how has it affected the cattle markets?
So the cattle industry, or the cattle markets in specific, China is kind of a growing market. So if we think about USMCA, that's a pretty established market. Those are huge export partners for us. Again, it removes some of the uncertainty of U.S. beef going into that market. So that's a plus for sure. If you look at China, it's the potential. Potential is the key word. We just got back into China a couple of years ago. A lot of the non-tariff barriers, so if you think about age, source, medications, those are the issues that were really keeping a cap on how much beef we exported to China. Phase 1 eliminated some of those. So Phase 1 eliminated the age restriction on U.S. cattle, or beef from U.S. cattle, and it also recognized the U.S. traceability system as good enough to get cattle or get beef exported into China. What it didn't do is it didn't remove the growth promoted trade barrier. So there's discussion in the Phase 1 deal that they're going to work towards a risk assessment on that. So potentially, if we could get that growth promoting ban removed, then that would really open up the market for U.S. beef into China.
Our last story in the markets, a toast to corn growers and U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Bolivian Foreign Minister Karen Longarek. The two signed an agreement recognizing each other's flagship liqueur, Tennessee bourbon and whiskey, and Bolivian Singani, as distinctive products of their countries. Singani is a kind of unaged brandy made from white muscat grapes in the Andes Mountains, and it's been called the national drink of Bolivia. This trade deal would expand U.S. exports to the South American country while protecting each nation's native spirits from fraud and counterfeit. And if you like brandy, you should try Singani. Cheers. And that's it for a deeper look into the markets. Mike?
Time now for our feature, and as a farmer, no one knows better than you how tough it is when it's just you covering all the jobs on the North 40. On the other hand, usually one of those jobs is your favorite. So, building on that idea, a group of farmers has come up with a business model that allows each of them to be small and yet still be big. Here's John Torpy with the explanation.
Earl Butz, the 18th Secretary of the USDA, famously once said, "Get big or get out," urging farmers to plant commodities fence row to fence row. Policies enacted during his tenure are seen as the building blocks for what agriculture and food production has become today. In recent years, getting big has proven tough, with dwindling rural populations, high land prices, rising production costs, and trade wars on multiple fronts hurting commodity prices. To combat these struggles, some farmers are giving up a solitary operating model for partnerships which help each other prevail.
In agriculture, we're really slow to adapt to collaborative mindset because we're all so independent. And so the beautiful part of that, though, is you can collaborate and still be independent.
In 2009, Northeast Iowa farmer Chris Barron was having a conversation with a neighbor about how to find efficiencies in his operation to lower costs. As the conversation continued, the idea of collaborating on each other's ideas for a better chance of success spawned a business plan. Over the past 11 years, others have joined what is known as Carson Barron Farms, each member growing their operation independently under a single business model.
Like in our case, there's 8 farm entities. We look at this as one farm. So it really doesn't matter where we go first. We have the machinery sized appropriately for the system. we have a plan of what's going to be planted first, what's going to be planted second, but it has nothing to do with who owns the land. It has to do with logistics, it has to do with field conditions, and it has to do with the hybrids or varieties that are being planted based on maturity.
Carson Barron Farms operates on a combined 3,000 acres in northeast Iowa. Each of the 8 individual operations work under the single business umbrella. The organization has 7 full-time employees spread out across all the farms in the group. During planting and harvest, the workforce roster can climb to as many as 18.
Some of the other challenges, though, that we see sometimes have to do with decision rights. So that's real important that that's clearly identified in the beginning. So if one person is responsible for marketing, that person is responsible for marketing. Or if there's one person responsible for seed purchasing or crop protection purchasing or any of those certain elements of the operation, we make sure that all of those roles and responsibilities are clearly identified so that you don't have misunderstandings.
Their business model allows both the beginning and veteran farmers in the group to quickly take advantage of new ideas.
Instead of having a conversation with them and maybe saying, I'm interested in renting your farm someday if you ever decide to retire, maybe have a conversation that says, I'm interested in learning about your operation and maybe working with you or helping you in some ways. Are you interested in that? And I think that's a lot more pliable and a lot easier conversation than trying to rent ground from somebody. And then you have a mentor, you have a partner, and you have somebody that's going to make sure you're successful.
The success of the joint effort led to the development of a business management consulting company that helps other producers duplicate the process. What is now AgView Solutions has assisted over 50 groups in creating business plans similar to Carson Barron Farms. One of those groups is managed by Eric Hill, a farmer and hog producer from central Iowa who sought Barron's help when he was having trouble finding employees for his operation.
Getting it started was, first thing we did was make sure personalities and work ethics and just kind of standard procedures are somewhat aligned amongst the groups, and that everybody was on the same line of thinking as far as the direction we want to take things. And then after that was just being as well organized to start with as we could and a willingness to improve our organization.
Hill and his partners have around 7,500 acres under the name Dirtworks Farms. The group also raises nearly 60,000 finishing hogs annually. Hill credits the partnership business model for helping him wade through the complications associated with getting Dirtworks up and running.
I'm a first-generation farmer, so most things I've had to learn on the go. And, you know, up until 4 years ago, I've never had that person say, oh, this is what happened back then when we did it this way. So that experience and acknowledging the experience of those older generations is very valuable. For somebody looking at doing this, I would say they definitely need to address what they're wanting to accomplish. Is it bottom line? Is it labor? Is it home life? Is it transitioning?
Carson Barron Farms is far from navigating all the thorny issues that go with any collaboration, but they remain committed to the idea. Barron stresses that for the Alliance-style business plan to work, the key to their success has been the one thing all farms have in common.
You're good? You can come under me here once I get my auger out?
It still comes back to if we really do what's right for the people that we partner with, and I give everything I can give to my partners, they're going to give everything they can give back to me. And that's what we see as really the benefit of this whole thing. Not who plants first, not who harvests first, but who can take care of each other the most.
Taking care of each other, shades of yesteryear. Well, next week, a different kind of story. It's hemp boom and sometimes bust. The new Farm Bill made hemp legal and launched a huge effort by many to capture the buzz of a new industry. More than 250,000 acres were planted last year alone. But there's more to hemp than meets the eye, and how should it coexist in states where recreational marijuana is allowed? We're headed to Colorado for a little reefer madness. That's next time on Farm Week. Remember, if you missed a story, look for past episodes of Farm Week on our website at farmweek.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube as well. Before we go, it is Super Bowl weekend. The 49ers and the Chiefs head-to-head in Super Bowl 54. A lot of people eating a lot of these buffalo wings. Because poultry is the top ag commodity here in Mississippi, we thought we'd see just how many of these people will be eating on Sunday. Turns out, according to our sources, that football fans will consume about 1.25 billion wings, along with 28 million pounds of chips and 8 million pounds of guacamole. I talked to the manager of the local Buffalo Wild Wings here in Starkville, Mississippi. He said he expects to sell about 2,000 pounds of wings on Super Sunday. A lot of wings, some pretty good eating. Zach's going to join me here. I have a feeling there'll be a lot of people on the crew interested in these wings. You like cooking buffalo wings, don't you?
I do. Actually, though, I prefer sort of a shredded chicken dish that I make where you put buffalo sauce to it and you serve it kind of like a sloppy joe with a little bit of, what do they call that? A little bit of sauce on top.
Okay.
It's fantastic.
Well, we're going to get started on these. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.